was quite surprised that as someone who is a pragmatic, scientific, fact-based researcher, when I heard that you were going into the area of crop circles, it was quite taken aback by that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, quite a few people tend to sort of poo-poo the phenomenon, and you know, they don't really think there's anything in it, and it's just people messing around in fields, having a bit of a laugh, and creating some kind of, you know, sort of weird joke. But actually, again, like a lot of these topics, if you actually try and go out there and look for evidence, you will find there is something very unusual and very important going on, which was the approach that I took. You know, and as I showed in the presentation last night, I first took a picture of a crop circle in I think it was 1987, and so you know, my interest was always sort of hanging there in the background. And my brother, actually, he worked as an agronomist, somebody who goes and looks at farms and looks at how the way crops are growing and recommends various things for farms. So he knew some of the farmers in that area, and he you know, he became familiar with some of the crop circles that were being laid. So when you've got something like physical evidence to work with, you know, then you can actually start to sort of look at what's actually going on and work out if it is indeed just somebody messing about with bits of wood and playing pranks, or whether there is something else to it.
Or whether it's something far more sinister. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, and you look at some of the complicated formations that have come about, and you begin to realise that these can't be the work of you know, just people stomping with bits of wood in the middle of the night. And in fact, again, if you listen to the witness testimony as well as looking at what's on the ground, you hear witness reports of crop circles forming in 10 seconds, you know, before their very eyes, with you know, orbs and beams of light and this sort of thing. So, you know, when you start to tie together the witness testimony with the actual physical evidence, a much more sort of complicated picture emerges, really, as I began to see things.
I was thinking of you as a researcher, though, because you're opening yourself up to criticism by covering this area.
Sure, I mean, but I think, you know, if we look at the topics we covered last time, you know, life on Mars, and you know, I do other talks on UFOs, and I think once you get into this whole area, I'm certainly not afraid to tell people what the evidence tells me, whether it be about crop circles, UFOs, ghosts, you know, Bigfoot. I'm interested in all those things, providing, you know, we can get some validated photographic evidence or some validated physical evidence, tie that up with some witness testimony, and, you know, make some basic checks, such as if somebody says, if somebody shows you a picture of a UFO, for example, and they said, oh, I saw this UFO, and it flew from this side of the sky to this side, you know, this side of me to that side of me, and they've got a video or a picture of that. Does the size match up with what they're describing? Does the colour match up? Can you match up with that with other witness testimony? And this sort of thing, and it's that type of thing you have to look for in all of these things.
So you're just applying the same kind of rigorous, fact-based approach as that you've approached things like 9/11 and these other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in your opinion, I mean, I suppose, I mean, I'm saying that someone's got to look at it. Someone's got to look at it and find out the things are there, aren't they?
Yeah.
In a way, there's more evidence for crop circles than a lot of these other things.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. You've got physical evidence which stays there for a few days, you know, and people actually go. You know, farmers have had problems with lots of queues of people going up and damaging the crop and going onto the land without permission, and all that's gone on. So we know that these things are there. Of course, it's you know, just establishing their source. We know that people, you know, do hoax UFO pictures and events. You know,
I mean, just going back to the farmers, that's a good point. No one ever considers the farmers in all of this, do they? Having people trample all the fields.
Sure, I mean, they do get a raw deal sometimes, but then some of them obviously see, once they've got. As my understanding of it is that when these crop circles appear, some of them will be wily enough to kind of like. Set it up needing charge admission or something like that, you know, or if a film crew wants to come and make a film about the crop circle, say, well, give me, you know, a fee for my time and the use of my land, and yeah, you know, you can make a film about it. So I'm sure that some farmers who, you know,
it works both ways.
Yeah, it can do. But then there's other farmers. I mean, there was one a few years ago. Where the farmer got his tractor and he just drove it all over the crop circle because he was fed up with people coming into the land. He actually vandalised the crop circle because he was so fed up with it. You know, and that's happened, I think, at least once. I've seen a picture of that, and he was just so fed up with people coming onto it.
Just because how many there are, though.
Yeah,
many of these things there are. I mean, there is a lot of interest from, you know, what we could loosely describe as a New Age or alternative movement in this. That we've even got an annual convention, the Glastonbury Symposium. But interesting enough, still, even though, I mean, I've been there myself, you know, years and years it's been going on, there's still no conclusions really. People are saying all manner of different things. It's been going on for a long time. And unlike, you say, unlike UFOs and this kind of thing, or even chemtrails to a certain extent, we've actually got the evidence here on Earth. You can go and you can touch it, you can feel it. And it's been going on for a long time. I know in your talk you said it's been going on since the 1600s.
Yes, yeah, basically that's when the first report was, you know, actually written down in the Natural History of Staffordshire by Robert Plott, and I think it was, yeah, it wasn't the 1600s, 1656 I think was the date. Yeah, so, you know, it does have a long history. When something like that has a long history, sometimes you can get some clues from that as to what's actually going on. You know, and then, you know, we go on to the, I think about 20, 30 years later, the story of the mowing devil. You know, and you've got this sort of story of the farmer not paying a labourer to cut the field, and the labourer then gets upset, and you know, and then the next morning the field is actually mown by this after this light has appeared in the field. You know, and that's the sort of folklore tale. You know.
Well, let's just look at that, because I always believe there's a lot of truth in folklore. It's got to come from somewhere. And when you look at these folklore and these fairy tales and things like that, there's a lot of basic truth in them. Now, this is one thing that you didn't cover in your talk. Looking at the mowing devil, one explanation that you know, bearing in mind a lot of these crop circles, they're on ley lines, they're on former ritual sites. What about the idea that they're created by some kind of either demonic or, you know, other consciousness, other dimensional entity?
Well, I think, you know, bringing that in is very important in terms of just the aspect of consciousness. You know, whether we talk about a demonic entity or you know, express it in different terms, where I think essentially talking about something which is not physical. In other words, we're not looking at somebody actually going out as a prank and stamping on the crop to flatten it. We're looking at something else. So I mean, we, you know, we can see with the UFO phenomenon as well a similar sort of change in language over the years, in that these things were described as airships. They were described as columns of fire in the Bible and this sort of thing. So maybe this mowing devil was the sort of more sort of religious definition of the phenomenon, in that they imagined a demon doing this because it was something which wasn't natural, and therefore it was not, you know, in line with what God would do.
So you think it was just the religious context of the time then?
Potentially, yes, yeah, potentially that's why it was called the mowing devil, because I don't think the account actually describes. I can't remember. I have to go and check it, but. You know, we have to ask, does the account actually describe a figure that looked like the devil, you know, pushing along the crop down? I'm not sure if it does or not, but maybe this was just somebody's...
I was just thinking from the point of view of, you know, I've heard many instances of, it was one the other day where speaking to someone, two ley lines had been crossed, you know, potentially, you know, centuries ago, a nature spirit had been trapped, and there was a lot of problems in the local area. There was a nursing home across the road, people were dying at a much greater rate. So we don't know what's gone on at these ritual sites in the past, and we don't know what kind of energy can access. You know, we hear about stargates, that kind of thing. Yes. So there's a lot of things like that. I mean, we were talking before, just mentioned before, about Leo Zagami. He's got an interview on Project Camelot. He's a top-level Mason talking about the sort of magic that the whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati, whatever at the top levels, they're using is the black magic to bring forth other dimensional entities. Do you think that ties? You know,
it's not something I've looked into greatly. I mean, I've watched some of the Leo Zagami interview, and you know, my perspective on this is that yes, it does seem to be that there are these other realms, and there is manipulation going on from them and within them. And does that factor into the crop circle phenomenon? Well, I can't say, hand on my heart, that I've seen the evidence which, you know, proves that. And, you know, looking at
even the manipulation of earth energies in terms of ley lines.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I haven't looked into the ley line connection. All that I mentioned in the talk last night was the more physical level, because most of the crop circles occur in the sort of Wiltshire, Hampshire area, and that's the geology of that is chalk. It's mainly chalk, you know, and of course Salisbury Plain is you know, well known for its sort of chalk-based geology. And then I think there's been a few crop circles in Canada, which is an area where there's a high amount of limestone, which is calcium carbonate, the same as chalk is. They're different forms of the same thing, and it's something to do with the aquifer as well, possibly. So if we're looking at earth energies, maybe these earth energies are collected within the chalk aquifer, because that's where all the water, is kind of the way that the water is held within the chalk aquifer. Maybe that has a particular resonance for this type of energy. And we as beings are obviously at 80% water, whatever I can't remember the exact figure, but so maybe we have a resonance with certain energies that resonate in water. So maybe that all ties into this somehow. Again, I can only talk about.
We live in an energetic world.
Yeah,
we live in an energetic world, which we understand so little of it. We're just trying to make sense of it, aren't we? Really, we're trying to make as much sense as we can. I mean, just these crop circles is nearly 30 different countries. It's not just cereal crops. You've got things as diverse as tobacco, conifer trees, even snow. So these things are appearing all over the place. 30 different countries, even though the main ones are in the south of England. Let's just dismiss, or if you could dismiss, some of the main things there. So there's this fungus thing, which is fairy rings, germination abnormalities, crops getting heavy with seeds. None of these are acceptable, are they, as explanations?
No, not in total. I mean, again, it's like all these things. Some UFOs are weather balloons. Some UFOs are aircraft. When people talk about them, some crop circles are fairy rings. I saw a quite a fairly symmetric ring in somebody's garden near my house, and that looked like a fairy ring.
These are mushrooms, fungus.
Yes, that's right.
Fungus,
it's basically an action of fungus putting out spores when it's growing, and then that makes a bigger ring, and each of those fungi grow and put out spores, and that makes a bigger ring, and eventually you get a large ring, and these can persist. So this is a natural phenomenon. But when you get in all these geometric patterns, with very complicated shapes, which we'll probably talk about in a few minutes, you simply cannot apply that explanation for that evidence. It just does not apply.
And then going on, of course, there's Doug and Dave.
Yes.
These people that a team of them. I think it's 3 of them, isn't there? They make shapes, and they've now. This is great. They've now branched out into commercial crop circles.
Yep.
So, like everything else in the world at the moment, you can now get corporate sponsorship.
That's right.
For crop circles. I mean, where does it end?
Well, exactly. I mean, the Doug and Dave phenomenon, I think that started in the mid-80s, and when a lot of these circles started to, grow in complexity, and a lot more interest was generated, and they would come on the TV and say, we can make crop circles, and they'd go on the news bulletins, and they'd show them making the crop circle. And of course, for most people, they just say, if they can make a circular shape in the crop, then it must be them. And it's a simplistic explanation, but at that point, the people who are not interested in expanding their awareness they'll stop at that gateway, and the Doug and Dave explanation will fit the data for them, and they don't really think about it anymore. And it seems to me that these Doug and Dave type explanations come along for all these phenomena, almost as if they're planted there by somebody. And maybe we are going back to the the Leo Zagami type of using energy to manipulate people and making them behave in certain ways. Maybe they have been manipulated at some energetic level to make them make these crop circles, and they don't even realise that that's why they've done it. And then we, as you mentioned, we get onto the circle makers, which is like Doug and Dave on speed, as it were. And you can go onto the circlemakers.com website, as you said, and look at the corporate sponsorship that's been given. Nike, and they did one for O2, the mobile phone network, and I believe, and they did one for a pop group called The Levelers. That was on their website, and I believe they've done others since, because when I was looking at this, it was like probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, they did one here in Blackpool on the beach.
They did, yes, I think that was in 2003. So, of course, people are making crop formations. They do it for money. So that is one explanation. And again, you look at what they've done on the Circle Makers website, and you'll see that some of them are quite complicated formations. I mean, particularly the one that we mentioned about the levelers. You look at that design, and that's, I think, from about 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe even longer, maybe 8 years ago even. And it looks like an alien's made it sort of thing. First glance, it's a sort of logo and stuff. So we know that they're doing it, and they'll tell you how they do it, and they do. But the thing is, they mainly do them in broad daylight. Apparently, they do some at night, and they have committed acts of vandalism on farms in some cases. And this has actually been the subject of a separate investigation by Richard Hall, who's put together a DVD called Crop Circles: Hidden Truth, and you can get that from richplanet.net website. If you track that one down, you will find that these people in the Circle Makers group, he's found that they have connections to MI5.
So in other words, these people on the payroll then, they're connected with the Black Ops?
Potentially, yes. That's you know, he hasn't uncovered like pay slips, of course, or you never do, but looking at the connections that Richard Hall has established within this group, it does seem at the one level, you know, they're there to just you know, make money from doing the corporate sponsorship, but at another, they seem to be with an agenda to muddy up whatever it is that's really going on, because something is really is going on with the crop circle phenomenon. Something very important is going on, and that's what the circle makers seem to be there to confuse and confound people. You know,
but so you sort of draw in with the UFO movement. That's a good comparison, because you were saying that since the 1990s, the crop circles have started to get more impressive, both in terms of size and design, much more intricate. But that does remind me of where with the UFO movement, when you see a Nazi UFO in World War II, it looks like a Nazi UFO in World War II. You see a UFO in the 1960s, it looks like a 1960s UFO, you know, it had a little sort of light on it, and just 1960s, yeah? You see a UFO today, I can't think what this decade's called actually, I haven't got to grips with that yet.
Yeah, the tens.
Tens or something? Well, this decade that we're in at the moment, whatever it's called, it'll look like it's from this decade, won't it?
Yes, yes, yeah.
So you think to yourself, well, the aliens aren't living surely in the same decades as us. There must be another explanation.
Well, of course. I mean, you know, all these questions need answering, and like we said before, that in the, you know, if you go back to the 1800s, they were called airships, because that was what the current technology was called. You know, these balloons were called airships. They weren't called aeroplanes, and they described them as looking like airships. Of course, more contemporarily, we've got the flying triangles, which have been very commonly cited, these triangular UFOs, which is very interesting. So, you know, and again, so like you say, we've got this sort of parallel between the UFO. I mean, you know, one thing I've noticed with the UFO footage that we've seen, it's got a lot clearer. I mean, this started with the 1991 Mexico eclipse, where we had some very good quality footage shot during the 1991 eclipse by about 3 different people. And then we had this clip that I showed at another presentation I gave here in October. And it's from Mexico, and we've got this UFO releasing spheres in broad daylight. There's like about 60 spheres coming out, and this again was shot by 2 different people, and it's in broad daylight. It's the most amazing piece of film. So it's almost as if we're getting this really good footage now, even, you know, forgetting the fact that obviously more people have cameras and stuff, but the footage seems clearer, it seems more sophisticated, more mind-blowing, and it's the same with the crop circles. So, you know, my view of that would be, really, that this is an expression of consciousness expanding, really, and we're seeing
or it's the Secret Services, though. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's the...
That maybe in parallel with that. Maybe in parallel with that. But you know, I think we could argue again, looking at that if we look at the sophistication of crop circles, I mean, one of the things that I think is essentially now proved is that some of these, I mean, you know, the presentation I gave last night was to essentially point out what I think is the technology which is being used. I think we know how the technology works that's used to create these crop circles, in some cases, and that too seems to have been increasing in sophistication in parallel with the designs over the last sort of 20-25 years and more.
I mean, if we just look, I mean, 80% of them in the south of England, right?
Yeah, it's around that. I think
approximately.
Yeah.
That also happens to be, allegedly, the home of the Illuminati, the New World Order, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. It's also, we've got the City of London just a couple of hours up the road from, you know, around the area where we're getting the crop circles. We've got the Rothschilds estate. I mean, I know that's in Buckinghamshire, so it's not right on top of it, but it's around that area. They've got plenty, they've got quite a few estates, the Rothschilds, yeah? And they've got this glass-type pyramid building there and everything with these ley lines and everything. I mean, let's just look at, I've got this here. I mean, Jack Valet states that in later years, more and more sophisticated precisely drawn geometric figures appeared. All the significant formations were observed in an area in close proximity to major research facilities of the British Defence Establishment, often in controlled airspace. He's basically saying, sooner or later, the truth will be known, it can be used to discredit the community of paranormal researchers. He's basically saying it's an inside job.
I think, that's what he's saying. He's saying that it's black ops making the crop circles.